everyone. Welcome to our BDN workshop series today. We would like to welcome you all here. Thank you for joining, and I hope you guys enjoy today's session. I would like to introduce our workshop presenter, Dr. Simone Taylor. Dr. Simone Taylor is currently a student affairs professional who made the switch from the corporate world into education. She obtained a bachelor's of science in business management, a master's in educational leadership, and a doctorate in transformational leadership. Dr. Taylor's dissertation topic focuses on resilience of Black female leaders in higher education and racial microaggression. Her passion is mentorship, leadership, student development, professional development, and branding. Based on the S.E.L.F awareness, her motto is read, retain, and educate, as every individual has the opportunity to be a student, to be a teacher, and to share knowledgeable information with others. Dr. Taylor has presented on the following topics: branding, time management, self-development, conflict resolution, restorative justice, emotional intelligence, microaggression, debunking the tropes of Black women, Black history content, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Currently, Dr. Taylor is located in the northeastern region of the United States. She firmly believes that our purpose can impact others with great intention, and she will continue with her model to read, retain, and educate others within any given capacity. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Taylor as she talks about what they didn't teach you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this workshop, and thank you for the warm introduction. As stated, my name is Dr. Simone Taylor, and I was inspired by this topic when I was actually going through my doctoral journey. The more I spoke to different participants, the more I was more intrigued regarding what they didn't teach you. How often do we ignore our truth when it comes to appeasing others? So the more I continue to go on this journey of self-reflection, because as you talk to different people and learn their trajectory and experience in life, it forces you to really reflect on your own and how often are we comfortable with our truth. So what they didn't teach you, reintroducing you to yourself, is really just that. So I would like to pose a question. How many times have you been asked, who are you? And you can, utilize the chat box. Unfortunately, I won't be able to see it, but our moderators will monitor and things of that nature, because I really like to engage, which allows our community to see where other people are coming from regarding their insights and perspectives. Okay. And here's a follow-up question. How many of you actually shared your actual truth? When we are in a position of asking or responding to a question that has to pertain to ourselves, sometimes we're giving a response that we want others to feel comfortable with. But how comfortable are we when it comes to our truth? So the goal of today's workshop is to reintroduce yourself to you and to break down yourself in order to understand your who, what, and whys moving forward. But before we begin, I would like to ask everyone, you could also put this in the chat. What is the best adjective that currently describes you in your current season? I'll give you some time with that. And as we're doing that, I'm going to move forward. I like to give a preview of what's to come, so there's no surprises and we understand the expectations, right? So there's going to be a quick activity, which is a Google form. That link will be available in the chat for your for you. Then there's going to be a 2-minute video regarding self-awareness, and then we get to break that down a little bit. Then we're going to go to the meat of this workshop, which is breaking down SELF, which is an acronym. I will expound more a little later on. Engagement is very important to me, especially doing these types of presentations, because you're allowing yourself to see what others, to see if other people align with your thought process as well. And there's always opportunities to learn from each other. And then towards the end of the presentation or workshop, I will provide a worksheet that I think will be helpful to help bring the entire workshop together. Will you be able to elaborate more based on what we learned today? Okay. So at this time, I'm hoping that the link for the assessment is available in the chat. Please be honest, this is anonymous. I will only see the recording. I won't see your name or anything of that nature. I would like to give everyone about 5 minutes to get this done. And when you are finished, please put a thumbs up emoji in the chat so we can get a better tell of who's completed it. And this is just something for us to start off with to see the tone of what our presentation will be about for today.
And as you guys are putting your responses in the form, Dr. Taylor, I just want to engage you a little bit. I see you have the acronym S.E.L.F. Can you just expound on, what that means and just specifically what does it mean to you?
Okay, I'm gonna expound it after they take the assessment because it is a breakdown, but
Okay.
basically self is really refocusing on your you, being comfortable again with you. And a lot of times we don't necessarily get that opportunity because of our priorities, us being busy, having just different responsibilities. So self eventually will be explained where it comes to what that looks like for you in your current season. And it's okay if you're not where you need to be. It's okay if you are doing the most, but it's really being intentional on the boundaries for yourself.
So it sounds like a reflection piece that
Yes,
most
yes.
people can kind of do. Okay. Oh, I like
Definitely, yes. What they didn't teach you, no.
it. Uh, so we'll give people one more minute to finish.
Okay.
And if you guys are finished, I guess you can just say finished in the chat or thumbs up. I think that would be great to help us continue our presentation. All right, we have one finished. All right, we have a second finished. All right, we can go ahead and continue with the presentation.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, in the chat, if this was something that you enjoy doing because it's really an introduction or reintroduction and how we could reinvest back into ourselves, just put another thumbs up that you actually enjoyed this assessment. Because a lot of times we're assessing other things, but we're not necessarily assessing who we are in that moment because sometimes we don't have the time or we just have a lot of things. We have a lot of caps that we wear for different capacities in our lives, right? So the level of self is scaled when you do or when you are intentional when it comes to assessing yourself, right? So when you have chosen your current field to work on during your season, that's you being intentional on being comfortable with your truth. And we're gonna expand on that. But first, of course, we have a video. And I chose this video because it brought a lot of familiarities to me when it comes to self-awareness. I think sometimes people forget that self-awareness is your truth, and sometimes we're not comfortable with our truth, and that's why we deflect sometimes, or we allow ourselves to go in different avenues to avoid certain things that makes us uncomfortable. But the goal of this presentation is to really refocus on why we should be comfortable with ourselves, which is our truth, which can help with our self-awareness. So here are some questions I want to pose before I hit play. Have you heard the phrase, a person's perception of you serves as their reality? How often is your presentation to the public the same as your actual presentation to you personally? Think about those questions as you watch this video because it helps with our truth and personal development.
The quest to better understand who we are can be a lifelong journey, and becoming more mindful will help you find the best path forward in your career. Self-awareness doesn't just happen. Most of us are gloriously unaware of who we really are and how we impact others. Self-awareness happens when we become aware of other people, things, and places around us, and how our actions impact others. But do you understand why you behave the way you do? Are you aware of what goes on around you? Why does somebody or something annoy or anger you? You'd better find out. Why? Because in the workplace, you'll be constantly evaluated. Your bonus, promotion, or exposure to high-level projects will be based on a series of key performance indicators. And part of the review process involves being able to assess your own performance. So you have to be brutally honest with yourself. What skills do you need to sharpen or gain? What are your tendencies? Is your behavior impacting other employees? What are your most obvious weaknesses? And how can you fix them? Continuous and honest self-improvement is expected. When you become self-aware, you know your strengths and weaknesses and how to manage them in the workplace. It also allows you to relate better to your colleagues. You'll be able to look at issues more objectively and the role you may have played in creating them. The more you pay attention to your emotions and how you perform in high-stress situations, the better you'll understand why you do the things the way you do. You're more likely to admit when you are at fault and can also leave your personal life at the door. This helps create a harmonious and more productive work setting. So, word to the wise, really work on getting to know yourself and be open to change. Your career and the company will reward you.
Okay, before I move on, like I mentioned, I wanted this to be a nice reminder of why self-awareness is important. And sometimes we do steer away from it because it is a form of accountability of recognizing your truth. And it's not always in the workplace, it's also in your personal life. Sometimes our personal and professional intertwine, but I think if we recognize the specific tools that can help us to be more aware, we can be more productive and conducive depending on the environment that we're in. So now, talking about the breakdown of self, S stands for standing or your status. E stands for elevation. L stands for leveling, and F stands for field. So standing to elevate while leveling your field. And that's going to vary depending on who you are in this particular season. So when I think about self, I think about emotional intelligence and how significant it plays in the role of who you are when it comes to your self-awareness. The video served as a friendly reminder that it's okay not to be at your best all the time because we're not perfect. And depending on how you're wired, perfection is your goal. But again, if we're striving to meet specific goals that doesn't align with our truth, then who are we actually doing it for? And then what purpose do we have, right? So there's always room for improvement. And if we're not humble enough to recognize that, then we will always remain stagnant. So let's take a look on self. I chose these images because how you choose to see yourself, that's your perception. How another person chooses to see you is their reality, right? I can say that I'm this bubbly individual, and a person can say, well, no, not really. You're really quiet and reserved, right? So it's the perception of the individual's reality. But again, if we're not truthful internally, then we're fulfilling a narrative that's not necessarily in alignment with who we actually are, which is ourselves, right? So let's do a quick breakdown. The goal of this presentation is to assist your interest in learning more about your growth and how to move from stagnation to better. The willingness and understanding your personal awareness is imperative regarding your mental, spiritual, physical, financial, and emotional state. The development of self incorporates multiple pillars where the opportunity to dissect what self is for you can serve as the first steps. The goal is to walk away with a more in tune understanding of who you are now. The expectations we require from others should also be applicable to self. We will have the opportunity to discover more regarding the tools in leveling your field. So here's a question. Do you believe that you will be the same person 2 or 5 years from now? Or maybe 10, right? Or even tomorrow, right? There are no right or wrong answers because, again, I'm speaking to you right now in your current season. We're wired differently. We receive information differently. So however these questions pertain to you, it's for you in this particular moment, okay? So again, S stands for standing or your status on how you may view you during your current season. Should this change? Why or why not? These are reflective questions to ask yourself because it's important to recognize, what are you standing on? What does that status mean to you? Is it a status you will accomplish for someone else, or is it a status because it's something you wanted to obtain, right? Second, do you believe internal promotion is as good as external advancement? E stands for elevation. Everyone's elevation will look different. However, if you strive to emulate others while leaving you behind, then this can be a false elevation. So when I talk about internal promotion, that means how comfortable are you internally? Because when whatever is internal comes out externally, right? So when people think the word promotion, sometimes they think money, they think a title, they think the big office, but no, I'm speaking of promotion when it comes to your elevation. What does that look like? People identify differently with the same word, right? So it all depends on how it's impactful for you in this particular season. So those are things to be mindful. If I'm going for a promotion, am I going because of competition? Am I going because it aligns with my truth and my desires? Or I'm going along because I'm on autopilot and I'm just here? These are just things to think about. Do you believe your focus is smooth or rocky? L stands for leveling. Before you understand your season, your truth matters. So now that we understand your status or your standing, your elevation, now if you get into your leveling planes, if it's smooth or rocky, that can be okay. It can't necessarily be both, right? Sometimes we have to go through the rocky piece in order for it to be smoothed out. But if we're not comfortable with our internal truth, which is our self-awareness, is focusing on self, then you may remain rocky for a while, right? But you have to also recognize, when is your tap out? What is most important within that particular season, right? Because in order for us to evolve and elevate, we have to be honest and consistent with ourselves when it comes to those questions that sometimes are hard to answer. Okay. Lastly, do you believe your domain or your realm is equipped to support the real you? F stands for field. When I think of field, I think grass. Another person may think dirt. Another person may think both, right? But my field is my domain. I'm responsible and in charge of my field. No one else is. People may have inputs. People may create a framework, but at the end of the day, I'm standing in my field. I'm elevating in my field. My field is leveled because of what I'm putting into it. I'm not able to accomplish all of that if I'm not comfortable with my truth. If I'm not comfortable with transparency or humility, then I'm always going to remain stagnant if I'm not comfortable with myself. Okay. And these are questions that I ask myself constantly for betterment and for better understanding, because again, another person's perception of you may not align with your particular truth, and that's okay. But having that self-awareness of how you project is important, especially depending on what you do for a living, what you do in your personal life. It's your brand, it's your representation. Okay. Please put in the chat if you're still with me. Just put some thumbs up or a happy face. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of self, which is standing to elevate while leveling your field, we have to go into the words expectations, right? What does that look like for some people? Of course, I have my questions. How do you define expectations, and does it apply to your current reality? Does your expectations align with others, or does it switch up? Do you think your expectations will change during each of your seasons? Now, you can share in the chat what you're comfortable in sharing when it comes to expectations, because again, how we define expectations will vary based on how we view the word, based on our experiences. So I can share a transparent piece. When I was in college around 1920, I was intentional on making sure that my expectations aligned with the people that supported me, right? That's my parents, my family, my professors, advisors, right? But it's not necessarily a bad thing, because, you know, there's frameworks that are introduced to you and you kind of like follow the lead, right? Or you follow the guidelines. But what I recognize as I'm reflecting is that I created a trend to lose my inner voice that should have spoken to my purpose. Right. But at that time in college, did I know what my purpose was? Maybe if I did more reflection, I would have understood what that meant. But at the time, it didn't dawn on me to recognize what a purpose is. My focus was fulfilling the expectations that was presented to me. And I made those expectations my own. So again, it's not necessarily not living in my truth, but not being comfortable enough to recognize what my truth is, to understand specifics when it comes to expectations, right? We have examples of people placing expectations on you in your marriage, in different types of relationship, being a senior leadership within your profession. There's different demands from people, right? And that comes with the territory where it's humanity. But again, if people's demands and expectations, that's their own, that's their truth, right? But where does your truth match that? Sometimes we put us to the side or to the back burner to fulfill the demands of others, but others are not necessarily doing that when they're pushing their demands. So if you recognize who you are in self, and recognize your particular expectations of what you're willing to do, willing to proceed with, that creates the boundary so you don't lose yourself every time you fulfill someone's demands of expectations, okay? Your personal evolution should never be rushed or directed by another. Like going back to the letter F for field, my personal evolution may not align with yours, and that's okay. But be mindful that it's important to recognize what that looks like for you in that current season, and recognize how important or where it prioritizes in your life based on the demands of the different things that you're balancing and navigating. Okay. And also, the pressure caused by other people's expectation can provide distress, which can feed the mask that we keep at the forefront. So I'm going to expound a little bit regarding the mask, but I just want people to recognize sometimes that the pressure caused from others is not necessarily intentional, but depending on how we choose to receive, how we're willing to help and assist other people or put ourselves in positions where we're there to support, is training them on how they can bring their demands of expectations to our attention. And sometimes we need to take a step back and reflect on what's most important on where it comes to those boundaries, where you're not losing who you are, so it doesn't become so pressure-like, but it's more about, okay, this aligns with what I'm doing right now, so I'm not losing who I am to appease another. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So moving forward to professional development or PD, professional development varies for different people, right? I chose these images because a lot of times we are wearing multiple masks, right? Sometimes we're not comfortable with ourselves, so we put on a particular front. Sometimes we have to put on multiple masks depending on the capacity that we're in. So should the mask remain? Is that something that we should keep at the forefront because it's a safety zone for us, it's a safety net? Does self and professionalism coincide? Now that we understand what self is, are we understanding what it is? Does it align with your professionalism? What does that even mean, right? How we are in our personal lives versus how we are in our professional lives may intertwine, but one may have a dominant characteristic in the professional realm, and another has another type of dominant characteristics in your personal realm, right? So sometimes those masks are needed because not everyone needs to see everything about you depending on your capacity. But there's times when people are losing themselves because they're so accustomed to relying on the mask versus using the mask as a particular tool to get through the particular task, right? And when I think about that, I think about managers and I think about leaders. What is the difference? In my opinion, a manager is organized. A manager delegates. A manager has the vision, knows how to execute. They have a team to do what they need to do. A leader can be servant. They lead from behind. A leader can be transformational. A leader can be transactional. A leader could be situational, right? But it doesn't mean because you are a great, effective leader that you are an awesome manager. And it doesn't mean because you're an awesome manager that you are a productive leader. They intertwine for some people, but they're two different things. And a lot of times, if you are in those leadership roles and you lack the self-awareness, that means you're not necessarily comfortable with your truth. So then why would a person trust your judgment if you can't trust yourself? So again, when we are in those positions of leadership, ownership, and things of that nature, we should be intentional when it comes to our professional development because it's only helping us help others. Humility helps others because it's showing like it's okay that this vulnerability needs to come about because it's providing me a better understanding of who I am right now. This is what my triggers are. This is why I respond to things this way. So how can I change that? Because if you are leading and you are managing, you are usually leading and managing individuals and they're learning from you. I always believe a person is learning or being trained. And sometimes you recognize it and sometimes you don't. So being intentional on how you're choosing to carry yourself is what's important. Lastly, I would like to say that celebrate your achievements. Sometimes in professional development, we go to workshops, we go to conferences, we have retreats, but celebrate your achievements. Don't minimize them. If you got to work safe and sound because you bypassed a car accident, that's an achievement. If someone came into your office with a sad face and they walked out smiling, that's an achievement. If you cleared out your calendar or cleared out your agenda for the week, that's an achievement. Sometimes we look forward to the bigger stuff and exclude the smaller things that gets us to the bigger stuff. And that helps with your acknowledgement when it comes to your truth and being comfortable with your truth. It's different tools to help you understand why awareness is important. Okay. Sharpening your skills by any means necessary. What I do have are very particular set of skills that I have acquired over a very long time or a long career. So when I saw this, because I love this movie, when I saw this, the question came to me, how are you finding time to invest back into you? How are you replenishing it back? When people are on vacation, they still respond to their emails. When people are in family events, sometimes they're called in back into work, right? Sometimes a person could be a caretaker and they're not necessarily working, but their life is just around the priorities and responsibilities that's bestowed onto them. Where is the time to find that investment piece, right? I think of time management and a lot of times people may struggle with that. However, it should be included in your schedule, your self-care, your self-awareness. So self-care feeds into your self-awareness because you're recognizing that I need some type of reset, right? A renewal. It could just be for 5 minutes. Sometimes it can just be playing music and just screaming for 5 minutes or reciting to your favorite lyrics for just like 10 minutes, right? Sometimes you need that reset because life, you can have your plans, but then something else hits you along the way. And then if you don't have tools to help you reset, you become enslaved to it sometimes. And then now it becomes a routine, it's a habit, and then you're losing yourself more and more. The mask becomes more of a requirement versus a necessity. And then you just, your field is not where it should be because you're not in your full truth, right? So it provides the opportunity to reset, which I think is important. So we're talking about ourselves, we're talking about our awareness. When we're talking about our awareness, we're talking about self-advocacy. When we're talking about self-advocacy, we're talking about transparency, which leads to accountability. And like the video mentioned, it's important to recognize what was it about that situation that I may have caused a negative impact. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong being wrong. If we're not wrong with things, then how are we going to learn? How are lessons created? People have to make mistakes and make errors, trial and error, right? So when we're putting ourselves in those situations, it's allowing us to be more comfortable with ourselves, reinventing the wheel for how can I continue to proceed as the leader, as the worker, as the caretaker, whatever title that you have or multiple titles that you carry. Okay, I hope you're still with me. All right. So again, this presentation is really not about fixing you, right? Because I think sometimes when we're talking about concerns when it comes to the internal, people automatically go to, well, I don't need to be fixed or I'm good or whatever the case may be. But I believe that, yes, we're not fixing you, but giving you the opportunity to reignite your passion. Why not pour back into what you give out, right? When you're doing that, it allows you to sometimes just reflect on the day, on the week. And sometimes with reflection, you're discovering certain commonalities that allowed you to respond the way that you have, right? Which helps with your self-awareness. And it leads you to your reality on what your self-expectations are. Because if you don't take that time to really understand who you are, other people's expectation is going to be your truth all the time. And how is that working out? If you're comfortable with it, fine. If you're not comfortable with it, here are some tools that you could move forward with that can really help with your evolution. We should always be evolving if we're giving the day to breathe and move with mobility and dexterity, right? So going back to the L for leveling, we should shift our lens and remember that our level serves as our truth, regardless if it's rocky or smooth. So once again, I think about the imposter syndrome and I think about, not necessarily feeling like you belong, right? I know in my journey, my doctoral journey, I know for a year I felt like I didn't belong in this online program. These people don't speak like me. I'm not really catching on. It just wasn't making sense. But I recognized why I was doing it in my season. That's what mattered, not what these people were saying and how these people spoke. They're them, I'm me. My field was my domain on obtaining a degree, right? But at the same time, it was rocky for me because I entertained the imposter syndrome. And once I aligned myself with a village of individuals who went through the same process, may have similar experiences, but they have different outcomes, it helped me understand my whys. It helped me reintroduce why it really matters to be truthful with yourself. Because if you're not truthful, you're living in a false narrative and you're not getting the replenished things that you need in order for you to succeed, evolve, and elevate. Okay. So lastly, I would like to just pose some questions again to utilize in the chat. In the beginning, I did ask if you could choose an adjective. And now going through this particular workshop, did it change or did it remain the same? You can put that in the chat. And if there was any particular new knowledge that you would like to share with the next individual, you can also just say, yes, I did find something new or whatever. Lastly, I'm a person who loves to journal. That is my reset time. That's my way of disconnecting from the real world because it's just me and my thoughts. I love this quote, I didn't come this far to only come this far. You may read it differently depending on who you are and where you are in your season, but I think it's important to write to yourself and revisit what you wrote in 6 months from today, just to see what reflection looks like, just to see like, oh my goodness, my mindset was here at this point, and this is what I wanted to change or work on, and this is where I am 6 months from now, or nothing has changed. We can't change overnight. Habits don't change overnight, but just being intentional is always the first steps. You can try it on Monday, it doesn't fall through. You can try on Wednesday, it doesn't fall through. But then another Monday comes, like, you know what, I'm ready. It's always good to do things when you're ready because that helps with it helps with you accepting your truth. Sometimes we do things because it makes sense, but a lot of times we're not doing it because it speaks to us. Instead, it's speaking at us. And if you're not comfortable with what's speaking through you, then you're not always comfortable with your truth, which makes your transparency a little janky, right? So, this is an exercise that's a part of the worksheet that you can utilize. And I think it could be helpful to help you understand why standing to elevate while leveling your field is imperative, not only for you, but the people who surround themselves around you, the people who rely on you, and the people who require your particular expectations because you provide something that they're unable to produce. And at this time, that's all I have. So I'm open to Q&As if you're available for that.
So this was such an engaging conversation on self-awareness and reflection. I was over here writing my own notes because I'm a writer. And the one quote that you said that really just stood out for me was, there is nothing wrong with being wrong. And I think sometimes as educated, professional Black people, sometimes we feel like that we have to be right all the time, especially if we have a certain position or a certain degree, that people see us as, an expert, which is absolutely true. But in the end, we're all living this human experience together. And that sometimes, we make mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with a mistake if you acknowledge it and have that accountability. So I just want to acknowledge that and tell you thank you for sharing that, because we all have to, just be okay with sitting in that space of uncomfortability of wrong sometimes. So thank you. I didn't want to take up all of the questions and comments. If anyone else had any thoughts, ideas, questions that you would like to share with Dr. Taylor. And if you guys have any thoughts, you can definitely put it in the chat. If you would like to share via in written form, that is definitely okay. And I just will also like to share, because again, I'm a writer. When you pose the question, does self and professionalism coincide? I think for me, that really made me take a step back and kind of reflect on, am I who I am when I am in these professional settings? Or, sometimes we say, are we our representation? And it really made me just kind of go back to, how sometimes we may code switch in specific spaces and how we feel like we have to speak a certain way within our professional field versus like when we're in a more informal setting with family and friends, and how that could be seen as not being your authentic self within those
Mhm.
certain spaces. So I thought that was just something to kind of bring up, and maybe you can even expound on it if you would like.
Um, the code switching is a thing. I think it's a survival tactic. And that's what I mentioned, like, our masks sometimes are priorities because depending on the environment that you're in, it's required. The thing is, I think sometimes people require too much of the mask and lose themselves in it. Like code switching is code switching, right? But sometimes it's safer to be behind something because I don't have to give you my full truth. So I can hide behind it. So, like you said, not being comfortable on being wrong, let me put that mask on, deflect. Let me put that mask on and be like, oh, I didn't know. You know what I'm saying? So it's just understanding that it's needed sometime depending on your capacity, but don't use it as your crutch all the time. It's just something that you need as a tool, right?
Got it.
Mhm.
So if you how would you express that for some of our like college students who are trying to like navigate, through their classes, and they feel like they just have to, be right, always get those answers correctly. Um, how would you explain, that to them so they can understand, it's okay for them to be where they are and kind of matriculate through their program?
I think sometimes when it comes to our college students, because they come from different walks, when and to start off, that's why it's important when you're comfortable with your truth, because they pick up the authenticity first before you even speak, right? So if they recognize like, okay, well, she talking, she seemed legit, that makes it more, that connection becomes immediate, right? So then now I become relatable. Once they recognize you're relatable, that active listening skill pops out. And then it'll be like, okay, I'm willing to listen to what she has to say. And then I'll be like, listen, when I was in college, I didn't know it all. And I realized that I aligned myself with individuals who did because they went through it, and sometimes, yeah, they do think that they know it all because that's what they think sometimes. But depending on how you relate to them, is understanding their language so they can hear what you're saying without the defense coming up. So I think aligning yourself with them to a degree, matching it with some references makes it relatable. So now I'm speaking their language, bringing the guard down, and now they come for the bait, in my experience.
Thank you for sharing. Any
Mhm.
last questions, comments, thoughts, ideas? Well, if not, again, you guys are more than welcome to put any of your thoughts, ideas, and questions in the chat. We would like to thank you, Dr. Taylor, for sharing your expertise and knowledge on self-awareness and being comfortable in your truth. I think this was, again, a very engaging and thought-provoking conversation for lots of groups of people, especially as people are maybe making transitions from one space to another, or just trying to be comfortable in the space, especially in our professional worlds. So again, thank you again. As you guys can see, Dr. Taylor has her information in the chat if you would like to go ahead and reach out to her. Make sure you reach out to her. And before we end, we have our BDN evaluation form, which will go inside the chat. Make sure you fill it out. Give Dr. Taylor her flowers and make sure that you give her her 5 stars and rate this evaluation in a way to show how it was impactful for you. And just to give you a little information of what's coming up for BDN, make sure you tune in to the BDN Virtual Writing and Productivity Retreat, which will be happening Tuesday, which is next Tuesday, April 2nd, Our next BDN workshop is next Wednesday, April 3rd at 5 p.m. The topic of that workshop will be Mindful Scholar, Nurturing the Well-Being in Doctoral Studies. And lastly, if you are on the West Coast, if you are in Los Angeles, the BDN Western Regional Conference will be starting April 20th. And this year's theme is on applying research and transforming communities. So here are your BDN events. Make sure you are engaged and tune in. And again, thank you for joining this BDN series, and we will see you all soon.